My name is Lana Hansen. I'm the Vice President of Portland Forward. Portland Forward is a multi-generational organization that focuses on empowering and engaging young people to make them feel like they have a voice in making change in our city. So we do that through learning by doing, and we like to take on big ideas in our city to basically create a more equitable and accessible Portland in the future and for many years to come. So the structure of city government is really important to us, and it's been a topic that we have been interested in, and it's been on our radar since about 2017. And we think it's really important and essential in basically questioning how our city governs itself so that we can create a more equitable city for the future and many years to come. This is our first in-person event since COVID came, so we're very excited to see you all tonight. We're thrilled to see you in person, and we're happy for those who might be tuning in later via our live broadcast. And thank you for Tabor Space for allowing us to host this here tonight. Tabor Space is a great community gathering space and a great place to host events like this. And with its wonderful coffee shop that's open daily until 2 p.m., you should keep it on your radar. So we're going to get started here very shortly, but I wanted to start with a few thank yous to our co-sponsors. This event wouldn't have been possible without the dedication of our volunteers at Portland Forward, Our Revolution Portland, Common Cause Oregon, and Honest Elections. I would also like to thank our media sponsors, KGW and X-Ray FM. In Portland, we're very blessed to have great local media who cover the most important topics here in Portland and make it accessible to Portlanders, whether that's over the air, online, or in print, which makes us super excited to have our great moderators here today, two of the finest journalists here in Portland. We'll start with Alex Zielinski. She's the news editor of the Portland Mercury, where she reports on city politics, police, and housing. Before joining the Mercury in 2018, let me flip my page. Alex worked as a reporter in San Antonio, Texas, Washington, D.C., and Eugene, Oregon. Alex graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in journalism in 2011. And then next we have Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, who covers Portland City Hall for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, and previously wrote about crime and criminal justice issues for this paper. His political and investigative reporting has won numerous national, state, and regional awards. So thank you all for coming, and I'll turn it over to you, Alex and Shane.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I can never tell. So this forum brings together supporters and opponents of Measure 26-228, which will be in the Portland ballots this November. This measure makes sweeping changes to the city's form of government, including creating a position of city manager who reports to the mayor and is responsible for overseeing all of the city bureaus and managing the day-to-day operations of the city. The measure would also expand the city council to 12 members who would be elected from 4 geographic regions using a ranked choice ballot. Each of the 4 geographic regions would be represented by 3 commissioners. The citywide offices of mayor and auditor would be also elected using ranked choice voting. And those are only the highest level of changes proposed on this ballot. You will hear even more details from the panelists as they articulate why they believe Portland voters should support or oppose the measure.
Hi, everybody. Shane Dixon Kavanaugh here. The format for tonight's forum will begin with introductory statements. Each team will have 4 minutes to introduce their positions. After the introductory remarks, we will move into question and answer. The hosting organizations have drafted questions, and each side will have 3 minutes to respond to each question. At our sole discretion, the moderators can ask follow-up questions of one side or the other. Responses to follow-up questions will only be 1 minute. We have a timekeeper seated in the front row, that's James right there, who will let the speaker know when they are nearing the end and have reached their available time. And now, to introduce you to your panelists. We will start with the supporters of Measure 26228. Seated and starting, we have Candace Avalos. Ms. Avalos is a first-generation American Black-Latina, daughter of Guatemalan immigrants and Black Virginians from the South. She is the executive director of Verde, a local environmental and social justice nonprofit. Ms. Avalos has served in numerous volunteer capacities, including as the chair of the Citizen Review Committee of Portland Police Oversight Board, as well as a member of the Charter Review Commission that developed the proposal we'll be discussing tonight.
Next up, on this side actually, we have Melanie Billings-Yoon. Dr. Melanie Billings-Yoon is an international negotiation consultant, author, and educator. A recently retired professor of business at Portland State University, she has spent 3 decades helping businesses, NGOs, and public agencies strengthen their internal and external relationships. She is the former co-chair of the Charter Review Commission that developed the proposal we'll be discussing tonight.
And thirdly, we have Sol Mora. Ms. Mora is the Civic Engagement Manager at the Coalition of Communities of Color, where she coordinates with partner and ally organizations to engage Oregonians in government reform and advance opportunities for historically disenfranchised communities. Previously, Sol has worked to effect change as a field organizer and as a staff member in the Oregon legislature.
And to our right, we have opponents of Measure 26-228. First, closest to us is Mingus Mapps. Mingus Mapps is a Portland City Commissioner since his election in 2020. His current portfolio includes the Water Bureau, Bureau of Environmental Services, and the Bureau of Emergency Communications. Prior to joining City Council, Commissioner Mapps' career included working as a professor and a time as a public servant working in City Hall.
And next to Commissioner Mapps, we have Vadim Mazursky. Mr. Mazursky is an administrative law judge in the field of disability law. Mr. Mazursky is originally from Ukraine and has lived in the United States since 1979. Vadim has served on numerous boards and committees, including the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Portland Citizen Review Committee, the Portland Film Festival, and on the board of directors for the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, also known as IRCO. He was a member of the Charter Review Commission that developed the proposal we will be discussing tonight.
And lastly, we have TJ Browning. TJ Browning is a citizen activist who has worked for decades in the area of police accountability in Portland. She has served on numerous boards and committees in the area, including being a member of the Citizen Review Committee and chaired Mayor Katz's Committee on Police Accountability. All right, with those introductions underway, we're going to start off tonight's conversation with some introductory remarks by the supporters of the measure. You will have 4 minutes total, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this conversation tonight. My name is Sol Mora, and I am serving as the campaign manager of Portland United for Change, and we are the Yes campaign to pass city government reform this November 2022. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the process that led us here and that shaped this important measure. The Portland Charter Commission is a group of 20 Portlanders that were appointed to serve from many different backgrounds. I think it's important to highlight that these Portlanders represented many sectors and areas of the city, from business to labor to many community organizing as well. These Portlanders went through a very robust civic engagement process that helped to shape this measure. There were so many comments that were submitted to the Charter Commission. 26 listening sessions were hosted. Surveys were also sent out to Portlanders. And through all of that engagement, the Charter Commission was able to hear 2 very strong sentiments from Portlanders. The first sentiment was that our city government is not responding well to our community members, and city services are not being delivered efficiently. Another key sentiment was also that Portlanders are not being represented in our current local government and democracy. The Charter Commission voted 17 out of 20 members to refer this measure to Portland voters. That is 85% of those Portlanders that agreed this is the change that our city needs. This measure is going to provide more meaningful and accountable representation to communities that have been chronically underrepresented, from people of color to working class people to renters, our communities will finally have a seat at the table through ranked choice voting. Another key part of this measure is geographic representation. For decades, East Portlanders have not had a seat at the table in our local government. Only 2 city commissioners have lived east of 82nd Avenue, and this measure will ensure geographic representation and also give voters within a district more pathways and more choices to elect candidates that genuinely do want to champion their priorities. And the last part of this measure will bring us efficient coordination of city services through a professional city administrator. I want to end by saying that the coalition that has gathered to support this measure is incredibly vibrant and diverse. We have 50 endorsing organizations, from labor unions like the Portland Association of Teachers to LiUNA Local 737, which represents construction workers, to SEIU 49, which represents healthcare workers and janitors, to civic groups that have long championed democracy within the state, from the League of Women Voters to ACLU of Oregon to Basic Rights Oregon to the Portland NAACP chapter, to service providers that understand we cannot delay the efficiency of services, like the Oregon Food Bank and Central City Concern. The reason that all of these organizations are supporting this measure is because we need this change now. There is no guarantee that another measure will be referred to voters at a later date, and I really want everyone here to understand the urgency of what is at stake and to really think about why so many organizations that represent all types of Portlanders are coming together to say yes to Measure 26228. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sol. Next up, we'll hear from the opponents of the proposal, who also will have 4 minutes to introduce their position.
Thank you very much, everybody. We're gathered here because we all want a better government for Portland. And right now, we've gone through a lot of crises here in Portland. We have a high crime rate, we have a high murder rate, we have a high homeless population, housing is too expensive, and our government has had a hard time dealing with it. We all want to have a city manager. We all agree on that. The part we really disagree on is this voting system. You know, promises are being made that it's going to be improving Portland, but when you look at it, when you looked at the fact that we're going from a system that no one else is using, this commission form of government, to a system that's not being used at all, using multi-member districts with single transferable vote, we're once again gambling with the future of Portland. And even though there's a lot of promises being made, when you look at the history of the United States has been moving away from multi-member districts, whether it's in Baltimore in 2002, moving from 3 members from each district, which sounds familiar, to single-member districts because there was no accountability, because it was too expensive. And we're moving to that here in Portland. So let's do something that works. Let's have single-member districts like other jurisdictions have. Let's have ranked choice voting, which is used in other jurisdictions, not the single transferable vote, because a single transferable vote lowers the threshold to electing public officials to 25% plus 1 of the vote. We trust Portlanders to choose their government officials. It doesn't have to be a computer. It doesn't have to be a wildly experimental method of electing officials. We trust Portlanders to actually vote and put people in office like they're doing right now and getting representatives that they want.
And, hi, folks. My name is Mingus Mapps. I'm one of your commissioners. Is this working? There you go. I'm one of your commissioners on Portland City Council, and I just want to start out by saying it's a real honor and pleasure to see you all here today. This is one of the first public meetings like this that I've attended since we have exited or entered this next phase of the COVID era. I think the thing that I bring to the table today is both a years-long commitment to reforming Portland's form of government. I ran for office because, like you, I saw that the city wasn't working well enough. The other thing that I'm here today to tell you is, you know, I don't think there's anyone in this room more committed to charter reform than I am. However, I was and am disappointed with some of the details that are in this plan that's before us today. You know, the form of government that we adopt right here could very much be with us for the next 100 years. That's how long the commission form of government that we work with today has been around. I think there are some elements here in the proposal which are worthy of implementing, things like having a city manager so we can coordinate services. I think Portlanders really want better representation on council too. I think that probably means increasing the number of folks who sit on council and changing the way we go about electing them. However, I have concerns about the way these two things, the multi-member districts and single transferable votes come together. That's a system that does not exist anywhere in America or frankly anywhere on the planet. I think that we could have a simpler, more effective approach to reforming government. And I'm here today to tell you that I believe that should this proposal before us today or in November not pass, we do not, nor should we wait 10 years to reorganize the way our city government is organized. Instead, I believe, and I will push my colleagues on council to push for a more streamlined form of government and try to get that referred to the voters within the next year. And with that, I apologize. We ran out of time on this one. We'll do better.
Well, thank you both. I want to thank both the proponents and the opponents for the introductions, and we're going to jump into our questions now, and we'll alternate between sides with each question. And I'm going to start with the opponents here, and recall you're going to have 3 minutes to field this question however you'd like. So this question is, what do you think is the ideal structure of city government for Portland, and how close does the proposed measure get to it?
Well, I think that everybody in Portland agrees that we need to have a city manager. That was something that we heard at the Charter Commission. That's something I hear in the debates that we're in right now. When I was running for office, that's what we heard about. So we're pretty close there. The form of voting is, I think, where we really disagree. We actually counted the people who testified at the Charter Commission, pros and cons against this very unique experimental voting style. 30% more people that testified at the Charter Commission actually had opposition to 12 city council members coming from 4 districts, 3 people each using a form of ranked choice voting that has not been used in this combination in the United States. And so I think with that, we have to listen to those individuals. People do want district voting. They want to have that accountability that if one individual represents you, if they're doing a good job, keep them in office. If they're doing a bad job, vote them out of office. Those smaller districts, and I would say 7 to 9 districts for representing Portland. I believe Commissioner Mingus Mapps will have a plan by Monday as to what that would look like is a good number. That's along the lines of the school districts that you're voting for already. You already know the organization, the neighborhoods that are involved, rather than the plan where you don't even know where your neighborhood will fall in and which district. So let's have smaller districts where you have similar needs amongst your neighborhoods, where you're electing one individual, possibly using ranked choice voting like in New York City or Alaska or some of these other places, but not this very esoteric and unique style of ranked choice voting where with only 25% of the vote will get somebody elected. That means you'll never get an incumbent out of office because they always get about 30 to 40% of the vote. This way, you'll have that accountability, you'll have that representation, and you'll have that on the ballot in May of 2023. You only have to wait a few more months to vote for that, and it'll be enacted in 2024.
We have 1 minute. Sure, why not? 1 minute remaining. This is so complex that I fear that my main objection to it is that anytime you make a very difficult voting system or a very complicated one, that leads to voting error. And with voting error, at the very end of the day, is the final vote going to actually represent the wishes of the voters? And that when you're doing not ranked voting, as they're calling it, but the single transferable vote, I've read it so many times and I still don't understand it. And last night there was an event where I heard one of the proponents explain it, and she was asked 5 different times to explain it, and I still don't understand it. I don't profess to be the brightest bulb in the sign, but I am a voter, and I think I'm probably an average voter, and that's my concern. This is too complex for people to understand.
Supporters, you have 3 minutes to.
Can
Yeah,
you,
and do you need me
can
to-
you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, what do you think is the ideal structure of city government for Portland, and how close does this proposed measure get to that?
Thank you. I was confused what the question was since the answer I heard was about districts, but I think we're talking about form of government, which is commission form of government that we currently have. So let me spend a little bit of time telling you what the outcomes were that we were seeking and how what we've proposed is meeting those. So currently we have a commission form of government. As you know, it is outdated. No other large city is using it. It is not meeting the needs of Portlanders and providing an efficient and effective city. And so what we heard from Portland is that they wanted city councilors that would be able to respond to the city services that they need, that would be able to be more strategic and visionary in setting up a plan for our city to grow and change. And so what we've created is an executive mayor, so a mayor that will now have responsibilities in overseeing the bureaus, overseeing the functionality, and the bureaus are doing those day-to-day things. They're fixing streets, they're providing public safety, they are doing lots of things that we all feel the impact of every day. And so having an executive mayor with the help of a city administrator, which we found was really important to Portlanders, that they felt they wanted to have someone in the government that knew what they were doing, that knew how to provide a professional service of overseeing bureaus. Getting over a cold, apologies for the coughing. And so what we've created with the executive mayor and now a legislative council is that council will be able to focus more on constituent services. They will be able to focus on policy and legislative work. Also, the charter is silent on the budget process, and so we made sure to add a responsibility of the council to approve a budget because budgets are moral documents, and if we're going to have more people on council representing different parts of the city, we wanted to make sure that they had enough power to decide where we are putting our resources. So now we're going to have an executive mayor who's going to oversee an administrator and be able to provide more efficient services. And we're going to have a city council that represents more people in the community and can say, here's the vision that we have for what we need in Portland, and please represent me on the council. So we'll talk more about the multi-member districts, the form of voting, which we believe go very hand in hand with the form of government we proposed. But ultimately, this is about a city hall that works for all, and that is what we have put forward in our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Shifting gears a little bit, our next question is going to start with the supporters this time. The question is, this measure proposes significantly changing the role and relative power of the mayor. The mayor would supervise the city manager and could propose city policy, but only vote in the council as a tiebreaker. Why do you think the role described in the measure is good or bad for the city? If this isn't ideal, what would be better?
All right, I will take this one as well. And just for context, I was the form of government co-chair, and so really spent a lot of time digging into how we could delineate these responsibilities. One of the things that we heard, not only from the community, but also from the bureaus, was that there was a lot of confusion on who had responsibility to accomplish tasks and who had authority to do so. And so when we were researching different forms of government, the two that are common across the country are a mayor-council form, which has a strong mayor that makes a lot of the decisions, and then a council-manager form, where an unelected city manager will make the decisions for the city. And so we wanted to create something that wasn't going to be so much of a hybrid that it would be confusing. We were really intentional about creating clear lines of authority because we didn't want to recreate the problems we already have. And we really felt that the mayor in this new form was going to have a lot of power. We're giving them the power to put into place the city manager, the city administrator. We're giving them the power to oversee all the functionality of the bureaus. And therefore, we discussed at length about what their role should be with the council. We wanted to make sure that if we're bringing in a more representative council, that we're not going to completely strip away their powers. So that balance was important when it comes to budget decision-making, when it comes to not having the mayor, who is already going to be overseeing all of the bureaus, have much more influence in council decisions. And we decided to give him, or them, apologies, a tie-breaking vote so that they still have a say in what's going on. They're not completely disconnected, but they're also not there setting the agenda. And we put in the charter that the council was going to elect their own president and vice president. So it was important for us that they had enough power, the mayor had enough power, but also that the mayor wasn't, what we heard from Portlanders was they didn't want a mayor that had too much power. And so we were constantly juggling with what are we hearing from Portlanders and what are best practices in governance. And we feel that we've met that balance by ensuring that the lines are clear. And with the mayor being a tie-breaking vote, they're still going to be involved in council business. They also still will have the ability to bring things to the council, and they will need to form their budget, for example, and the council will approve it. So that balance was important, and why we decided to have them just be a vote and not a member of council.
All right, thank you. Now we have the same question for opponents. I'll reread the question. This measure proposes significantly changing the role and relative power of the mayor. The mayor would supervise the city manager and could propose city policy, but would only vote in the council as a tiebreaker. Why do you think the role described in the measure is good or bad for the city? If this isn't the ideal, what would make it better?
Thanks for that question. I think it's an important one. I appreciate Commissioner Avalos's rendering of how the system would work, but I think I have almost the exact opposite interpretation of how this will work in the real world. Under the proposed changes, the mayor would have a very narrow role in city government. And one of my particular concerns is the forums and places where the mayor and the rest of council come together. Essentially, as you heard, the only time the mayor really engages with council is when she breaks a tie vote. I'll tell you, I've been on council for almost 2 years now. Tie votes don't happen that often. And one of the reasons why they don't happen that often is because of the dialogue that happens amongst members of council. So I think we enter into dangerous space when you have one body, council, which is charged with coming up with policy, and then you have another body, let's say the mayor and the city administrator, who are not involved in that dialogue. What you're likely to see are either miscommunications or, frankly, if a mayor, if something goes bad, the mayor is going to be the person who gets blamed for it. So you imagine what a mayor is going to do when the mayor is handed a policy which they both disagree with and they think is bad for the city. What you're likely to see is a mayor trying to implement, frankly, doing a bad job of implementing policy. It's basically a recipe for passive-aggressive government. It's not the kinds of reforms that we need in order to get people out of the tents, to get people into mental health care, to build more affordable housing. This really incentivizes dysfunctional government. It's sad for me to say. I would much rather see a system where actually the mayor is part of the team, which is city council, and is at the table as Portlanders are trying to develop solutions that'll make our city better. And I want to.
Well, this wasn't even on my radar until I attended a pro and con debate last night on this issue, and I was shocked how many people in the audience stood up and was upset that we were going to have such a weak mayor. So I pulled it up today to read it, and I just don't even agree with how it's been described. We're hiring a city manager, and the city manager is going to run the bureaus. And so the mayor can hire the city manager, but the city council has to approve it. The mayor can appoint the city attorney and the chief of police, but the council has to approve it. The mayor can propose a budget, but the council has to approve it. So breaking a tie really seems to be the only power he has. That's a weak mayor, and it doesn't sound workable.
Thank you for your responses. We're going to go to a next question. This next question deals with racial equity effects of Measure 26228. We are thinking of racial equity in a very broad sense, including who participates in boards and commissions, who funds campaigns, who receives city contracts, and how policies are developed and implemented. In what ways does your position increase racial equity? Starting with the opponents.
So our position is trust Portland voters. Right now, with respect to racial equity, 80% of our city hall is from marginalized or underrepresented communities in the past. 60% are from minority communities. Trust Portlanders to vote people in that represent all of Portland. I ran for office. The top 3 vote getters were a black woman, a Latino man whose father worked as a migrant worker, and an immigrant from the Ukraine. Those were the top 3 vote getters. And 2 of those were on the east side, came from the east side. Me from the west side. The 2 people on the east side won. Trust Portland voters to know how to represent themselves.
Go ahead, you can applaud that. I'd like to add one thing. If you dig into the Charter Review Commission's own research, I think if you go to an appendix, a footnote in the appendix, they refer to a study which they commissioned from Tufts University, which was designed to basically estimate minority representation under the system that they've put forward. And if I'm recalling correctly, by their own estimates, they predict that the system should consistently elect a city council which is about 34% minority. I will point out that today we have a city council which is 80% minority. That gives me some pause.
Now for the supporters, do you need me to reread the question? Yeah. We are thinking about racial equity in a very broad sense with Measure 26228, including who participates in boards and commissions, who funds campaigns, who receives city contracts, and how policies are developed and implemented. In what ways does your position on this measure increase racial equity?
Thank you so much for such a crucial question. I think it's really important when we're looking at our city council, you will hear that it is diverse. You cannot look at that single instance and not contextualize it in the decades-long history of what we have seen on our city council. In the last 100 years, again, we have only had 2 city commissioners that have lived east of 82nd Avenue. We have only had 5 people of color that have served on the city council as well. That is in over 100 years, only 5 people of color that have been able to get elected. So you do have to consider that the system itself was structurally designed to underrepresent many communities. I think it's really important that we do not lose sight of that history. This measure specifically was designed for the context of Portland. In Portland, gentrification and communities of color being pushed out of their historical neighborhoods, that has caused voters of color to be so dispersed in our city that you cannot draw a single district where voters of color are the majority. So that Tufts University research that was mentioned found that multi-member districts are the best fair representation model for Portland specifically. If we only have 1 elected official per district, the dominant group of voters will be able to take every seat to city council. And this not only goes for voters of color, but it is also for renters. So having a system where you have multiple elected officials using single transferable vote, this is going to provide fair representation. I want to clarify something that was said earlier, which is that single transferable vote vote is not used within multiple geographic districts anywhere in the world, which is simply inaccurate. Malta has used that system since 1921 for all of their local elections as well as national elections. Scotland is another great example where they use single transferable vote to elect multiple winners, and that is for their local city councils. There are so many examples that we see worldwide, as well as Cambridge, Massachusetts, which uses single transferable vote in the United States. And what we're seeing is that more racial and ethnic minorities are getting fairly represented. Alaska is a great example where we see the first Alaskan Native woman that just got elected to Congress. Ranked choice voting promotes newer voices getting elected into council, and it increases representation for people of color. These methods have been studied, and they will provide better representation.
And Saul, for the supporter side, because we can ask some follow-up questions. So talking about single transferable vote beyond Cambridge, are there other examples that you can discuss where that's been used in the United States, and can you speak to sort of what has been its sort of successes or shortcomings? Also, just to point out, the ranked choice voting system in Alaska is not single transferable vote, so that's different.
Yes, that is correct. Yes, so ranked choice voting can be used to elect one winner or multiple winners. In the context of the United States, single transferable vote was very common in the progressive era across many jurisdictions, including Ohio. When we're looking at the data there, one of the reasons that they started moving away from single transferable vote, especially when you look at Cincinnati, was because more people of color were being elected. There were a lot of racially motivated groups of voters that rallied against single transferable vote. So we actually have used single transferable vote in the United States, but because those dominant groups were able to organize, we moved away from it. So I think that history is very important to elevate. I also really like to talk about East Point, Michigan, which had a civil rights violation within their voting system because they were not able to have their Black voters be represented on council. And so what was prescribed through that lawsuit was single transferable vote, and they used it in 2019 and were able to elect the first Black elected leader. So I do think it's really important to look at those examples where the outcomes are clear.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up?
Sure.
So East Point, Michigan is a wonderful example. 2019, yes, they used single transferable vote. 45% of East Point, Michigan at that point in time was Black. Now it's 49. 4 people ran for office for 2 city council seats, 2 Black individuals, 2 white individuals. There's actually a documentary about this online. It's really cool. The 2 people who won the city council seats using single transferable vote were 2 white individuals. Now their mayor, on the other hand, who ran under a different election system, Black woman, she won the mayoral race. You look at Cambridge, which was, the other aspect of this, where they do use single transferable vote at large. And this is in the Oregonian of all places, so hats off. But they quoted someone from Cambridge: some vote for a candidate because of neighborhood proximity, other because of race, or simply because they like a person's handshake. That all can get captured by this kind of ballot, said Winters, who added that the final results can come as a surprise to many. The arrogant political types think they can impose their sense of proportionality on an election, but voters often have other ideas. So experts in Cambridge are also saying that proportionality is not always a result of this voting system.
All right, moving to another question. One criticism of the existing commission form of government is that it discourages commissioner collaboration, since each commissioner has their own portfolios of bureaus that they manage and generally don't appreciate the interface of the rest of council. How do you think the proposed system will improve or worsen this dynamic? I'm going to start with the supporters.
Okay, just making sure. We've got lots of form of government questions. Okay, so what we have done with the way we've set up this form of government, I hear the concern around dysfunctionality. Is that a word? Maybe it is. And I think that what the combination of having a legislative council that can focus more on policy work instead of the day-to-day work of a bureau is really the key here that we started with. I think also it means that we tried not to be really prescriptive in the charter by saying this is exactly how they're going to need to function, because a lot of this takes leadership. It's going to take the council that gets elected now in a way that will represent more of the community will need to decide procedurally how they're going to make this form of government function. And that's something that the council, despite the challenges of the commissioner form of government, they already do some of those things. Like they have committees where they can talk about specific topics, houselessness being one of those that is plaguing the city that the commissioners are trying to be collaborative on. And so that is a very similar thing that the new commissioners or counselors would be able to do, is organize themselves in a way that's responsive to what the community needs, whether that's via constituent services, doing more of that, to hear from people directly about their ideas. We can't expect that the counselors are going to know everything. Their job is to go out and find the answers, not know all the answers. And so being able to work with the community while also organizing themselves in a way that they can be responsive to policy issues, setting a larger vision and strategic plan for the city. We're hoping that will giving them more of that functionality instead of what is the Water Bureau doing, what is the BPS doing as far as their daily tasks. They can focus more on that, where the mayor and the city administrator can deliver services. And they're going to have to be, those branches need to be collaborative. The executive and legislative branches are going to need to work together. So yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the Sightline Institute just published some really great research on single-member districts versus multi-member districts. One thing that we see is that with single-member districts, because they're smaller, elected officials become very insular in their priorities. So having multi-member districts does help to foster that collaboration between elected officials, especially on crucial issues like affordable housing. What you see is that with single-member districts, affordable housing and the progress plummets by 20% under single-member districts. So I think the geographic representation and having multiple leaders is something that will help enact this as well.
All right, now punting to you guys. I'll repeat the question. One criticism of the existing commission form of government is that it discourages commissioner collaboration, since each commissioner has their own portfolios of bureaus that they manage and generally don't appreciate the interface of the rest of council. How do you think the proposed system will improve or worsen this dynamic?
Well, Mengus, your guy on City Council, I feel equipped to answer this because this is the reality I live with every day. First, you all should know the commission form of government is one of the reasons that Portland consistently fails to solve the problems that matter to you most. Take an issue like houselessness. You might think, well, we have... sorry, is this better? Take an issue like houselessness. We have the joint office, which deals with houselessness, which is in Commissioner Ryan's portfolio. So maybe it's all set. But then you might realize or remember that, if someone is sleeping on a sidewalk, that's an issue that's in the right of way, which is dealt with by PBOT. So if you want to have a strategy that deals with houselessness, you have to have the commissioner in charge of housing and the commissioner in charge of right of way on the same page. And if that sidewalk were in a park, we have another bureau which deals with parks. So you need to have the commissioner in charge of parks, the commissioner in charge of sidewalks, and the commissioner in charge of houselessness, all on the same page, pushing forward with the same strategy. A lot of what the day-to-day work behind the scenes in council is trying to work through and coordinate on issues like this. One of the reasons why progress is slow is I think different commissioners have different approaches and philosophies about how to solve important problems. I can also tell you the way most cities get around this problem. And the way most cities get around this problem is either by having a city administrator, some professional who's in charge with coordinating the day-to-day services that citizens of Portland are provided for. Sometimes you can get at the same thing with a strong mayor. I think that's what Portland should do too. It's remarkable that we haven't done it yet. And I also want to say, if the people of Portland don't embrace the charter reform proposals which are on the table in November. Certainly, I will be pushing my colleagues on council and my peers in Portland to consider a second proposal. And one of the key things that will be part of that proposal is the city administrator. I'll tell you, deep in my bones, I believe that is the single most important thing that the city of Portland can do to make our community work better. And I got less than a minute left, but I want to give my peers a chance.
And Mingus Maps actually showed up, one of the first people at our Charter Commission meetings, and said the exact same thing, and that's what we're charged with. We all believe we need a city administrator. That's not even a disagreement there. As to the other part about people working together better under these multi-member districts, we are actually pretty lucky. We had Terry Harris here in Portland, who moved a couple years ago. He was on the Charter Commission for Baltimore when they had 3 members per district. He came here to every single one of our Charter Commission meetings and said, do not have multiple members here because there's no accountability. People don't work together. They point fingers at one another. You never know who's working and who's riding on the backs of other people. He came and testified, and nobody listened.
Next question. The current proposal would cost a large amount of money to implement and potentially a long-term increase in the cost of city council. How should voters be thinking about this amount of money used for government overhead as opposed to the direct provisions of services? We're going to start with the opponents here.
Thank you. You know, I have never made a large purchase in my life that I didn't know the price of what I was buying. And this, if you look at what they said it could cost, what a range, right? Well, I went and I got on the computer one day and I looked at other cities. San Francisco's bigger than us, they've got 11. San Diego's bigger than us, they've got 9. Charlotte has 7. Columbus has 7. I couldn't find a 12, except for Charlotte or Indianapolis that have 25, but they're part-time and make $11,000 a year. This is going to be so expensive. And when the argument that I listened to last night, well, it's just a small percentage of the budget. Please, can you think about that? Seriously think about that. That small percentage of the budget could build shelter space. That small percentage of the budget could fill potholes. That small budget could provide school lunches. This is so expensive. We can streamline it, have it far more efficient, and not waste money. We have too many problems in this city that desperately need addressing that take money. To spend this kind of money on an experiment is absolutely fiscally irresponsible.
And you know, we added up the numbers, and you know, on the low end it's $900,000. That's only if you pay for the extra city commissioners, no staff, no office space. On the high end, $43.8 million over 3 years. That includes the cost of implementing the process as well as the amount of money spent on jobs. Also, that doesn't even take into account the matching funding for elections that the city pays for. So it matches 9-to-1 on the first $20. That's $1 million every year, or millions of dollars on an election cycle. That is going to be incurred every election because we're going to have more people. And what do we get from that? So, you know, let's actually spend money on homelessness and housing and the things that we need. Our budget is going to be shrinking over the next couple of years because businesses are moving and people are moving. It's going to be tighter, and nobody here wants more taxes, I'm sure, but we want our money to be spent wisely.
And as your guy on city council, I can just share with you the truth. This thing is expensive. We heard a couple of budget numbers right now. We're already thinking about the budget for next year, and we're already thinking about how to implement the charter reform proposal. The number that we are frankly knocking around is the $40 million number. This has big implications for those of you who follow City Hall closely, for example. We're coming up to the fall bump. It's not clear to me that there will be a fall bump this year because we're so concerned about the need to set aside dollars for implementing charter reform.
Thank you. And supporters?
I want to start off by saying that change is going to cost. That's one thing that is absolutely certain. An alternative proposal would cost, and I think you have the benefit of not knowing what that will actually look like. Another thing that I want to add is that we need to invest in the infrastructure. Yes, money would be great for direct services, but let's think about the coordination of how you deliver city services. We could invest into one type of service, but if you're not actually centralizing the way that those services are getting delivered to Portlanders, that is the issue that we see here. It is structural. We don't have the structure to deliver those services to Portlanders across the city. And so this is a direct investment to get us to a place where we do have the capacity of city council members responsive to the size of our city. And I also want to end by saying that if you look at the percentage, it puts it into perspective. Of the entire budget, this is 0.14%. Not 14%, 0.14% of the entire budget. And it is a very specific part of the budget, the discretionary resources that the city has.
You just took all my lines. All right, let me just add a few things. I said to her, you can speak first, but don't take all my lines, whereupon she took all my lines. What I want to say now is, I was going to focus on that 0.14%, but what I want to focus on right now is, it's not how much you spend exactly, it's whether that money gives you value. Right now, Portlanders are being taxed up to here, but what exactly are we getting for it? We've talked to people on the far east side. No one's filling their potholes. She says the money could go to potholes. That would be nice. Let's start doing that now. No one is taking care of the fact that there are no crosswalks on extremely dangerous streets so that people are getting killed. No one is out there resolving these problems of trash. I tried to get some trash removed from the 405 overpass here in down by PSU. I learned that trash collection is being controlled by 20 different departments in this city under all 5 different commissioners. And I was bounced from person to person to person until we got a volunteer to do it. It's really great we have things like Adopt One Block, but is it really right after we pay the level of taxes that we do that we end up having to adopt our own block and take care of our own trash? The fact is, the money right now is not being spent wisely at all. Thank you.
All right, another question starting with the supporters. Changing the commission structure to remove oversight of bureaus removes the onus of a commissioner's office for resolving some specific constituent needs. But folks will still need someone to call when they have an issue. If multi-member districts are implemented, how would a Portlander know who to call to get their needs met?
I want to start by really thinking about who currently reaches out to our city council members and who has access to local government. When we did community outreach, what we found was that many Portlanders that had never called an elected official didn't understand what the structure was. They had never felt connected to City Hall. And so one of the ways that multi-member districts will help to ensure that people do have someone that connects to their issues is that it's increasing the opportunities for people to elect a candidate that shares their priorities. It's unrealistic that with single-member districts that one individual will somehow represent all of the residents that live in that geographic district. And while that's not a guarantee in multi-member districts, it's about increasing the chances and the pathways for Portlanders to be able to reach out to a council member that does share their values. So one thing that I really like to think about, for me as a renter, I want to connect to someone that has that shared lived experience. I want to connect to someone that understands my issues and will genuinely care about that holistically. And so with multi-member districts, it's giving you more council members so that you can connect to them on that level.
Thank you. Everyone likes to say how complicated this is. So let me start with something really easy. If you have a problem in your district right now, who do you call? Nobody. So what you can do now is call the district office. And if there's a district office of your city council, they can patch you into any one of 3 people who could take that call, as opposed to 0 people. I will also say I find this particular line of argument, who would be responsible, who is accountable, that, if you think about it another way, that would be a very strong argument for why you need single parents and not 2. Because if you have 2 parents, which one of those is accountable? The fact is, more is better. That means there are more people looking out for you, more people legislating for you, more people going around your neighborhood learning what the problems are, more people listening, more people able to come out to your neighbor association meetings, more people able to come to your fair. More is better for our society. Thank you.
All right, now for the opponents. Changing the commission structure to remove oversight of bureaus removes the onus on a commissioner's office for resolving some specific constituent needs. But folks will still need someone to call when they have an issue. If multi-member districts are implemented, how would a Portlander know who to call to get their needs met?
I don't know. I know how the current system works. If you have a problem with your water service or your sewer service or 911, you should call me. And that's how the commission form of government works. And in a lot of cities that have district-based representation, if you really want a crosswalk at, say, 115th and Sandy because the traffic is so bad, you would call the representative who represents that particular neighborhood. One of the things that disturbs me about the multi-member district proposal on the table is that you wouldn't necessarily, in fact, you would definitely not have a representative who was connected to every block in the city. And I think that's quite unfortunate. When I've gone out there and talked to Portlanders about what they want someone who basically knows their neighborhood and will be responsive to that pile of trash or that person in need or this new bike lane that you either desperately need or is destroying your business. So I think that is actually one of the weaknesses of this. If there are 3 different approaches, the commission form of government, the sort of straight single member districts and the multi-member districts, I think the accountability piece is least well articulated in the form of government being presented to the people of Portland today. And I'll hand it to my colleagues.
Thank you. Good points. Also, it's hard to believe that the proponent's solution to a government that does not work is a bigger, more expensive government that they claim will work. You know how we know that it won't work? Because we can actually look at other places where it does not work. So there was an article, again in the Oregonian, going out to Baltimore, where they moved from multi-member districts to single-member districts, and one of the individuals there, who actually was a Hispanic woman, the first Hispanic woman to get elected to their city council, said it was problematic, extremely problematic. Residents didn't know where to go when they had a problem. There often were concerns about whether all 3 worked equally or whether 1 or 2 were simply skating by. So we have an example here of the United States where it was not working, and we have a theory where it might work. I would go with the example. Single-member districts, you know who to call. Smaller districts, instead of these larger districts the size of Salem or Eugene, electing 3 people, instead of Portland, where you elect 4 people to city council, 1 person to answer your phone calls. If they answer your phone calls, keep them in office. If they don't answer your phone calls, vote them out.
Yeah, thank you for your answers.
This measure combines several different ideas all into a single measure. Moving away from the commission form of government, a new ranked choice voting method, and districts represented by multi-members. So for both proponents and opponents, and we're going to start with the opponents first, what would you say to voters who are attracted to some but not all of the policies in this measure?
Do you mind if I take a second? Okay. Wait 6 more months. wait 6 more months. As of Monday, I am very hopeful that Commissioner Mingus Mapps will announce a plan where people will have a choice. Right now, there's no choice. When I was on Charter Commission, I spoke out 2 times, and when we voted on these, saying, give Portlanders the democratic choice, give them a choice on the form of government. Give them a choice in the form of government, give them a choice on multi-member districts, give them a choice on single transferable vote, and let people choose, and we need that choice. That is what democracy is about. If people trusted Portland voters, they would let them have the choice. Right now, it's take the good with the bad because you got to vote for everything. It doesn't have to be that way.
You just said what I was going to say. It seems to me to come down to trust. I'm very angry that the Charter Commission didn't trust the voters of Portland to make the decision as to what they wanted. All of these should have been individual ballot measures. We could have, yes, we all agree we want a city manager. Yes, we want to end the silos. Yes, we want districts. Why wasn't this all individually? It's trust. It's a matter of trust. I have more faith in you to vote. I trust you. When you look back on the history of to bring up the history of what we've elected in this city, I don't know, ladies, 100 years ago, did we have the right to vote? Are we the ones that were making that poor choice? Portland's growing. Portland's changing. We always have maintained a sense of respect and honesty in this city. That's been a key mark to being Portland. And they should have trusted us enough to make this decision. I'm totally opposed to it because of the package I'm forced to vote on. They didn't trust us.
You want one more minute?
Sure. I don't have that much to add other than this is one of my disappointments with the proposal on the table, too. The way I count it, it looks to me like there are at least 5 major reforms being proposed here. I think some look really good. I think some are clearly completely novel, never been tried before in an environment when the stakes are really high. I think that we would have a better dialogue and frankly ultimately wind up with better public policy if the people of Portland had the choice to vote on each of these items individually for reasons which I still don't understand. The commission chose to go in a different direction on that, and I think that's an unfortunate development.
I want to follow up on that just really quickly. We've heard a lot about this proposal coming out next week from your team, kind of as an alternative, as a choice, kind of giving folks an option. Yeah. And you've spoken a lot about trust and how it kind of the most important piece of this is the investment from the public and the contribution from the public and voters towards a measure. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about what kind of outreach and kind of public involvement have you put into this measure that's going to be coming out?
Oh, sure. I got 1 minute. Well, number one, I've been out talking to Portlanders about the need to change our charter for, at this point, 3, if not 4 years. Literally, I think the first thing I did the day after I won this seat was to put together a group to begin to work towards charter reform. We have been meeting, and frankly, I really anticipated being at this hour of this month, I really anticipated being on that side of the aisle, making the argument for why you should vote for common sense charter reform. Over the course of the last, I guess it must have been a year and a half, we've had dozens of meetings, tons of community events like this, put together a diverse group of Portlanders to literally think about what we're looking for. I'll tell you, the proposal that will come out on Monday is not something I cooked up in isolation. It's rather the product of groups of Portlanders like you coming together to both look at what's on the table and to articulate ideas about how to make it better. And I look forward to sharing that with you in a couple of days.
Thank you.
And then we still have the supporters to
Yeah.
answer that question. Going back to that we have multiple proposals in the single measure. And so what do the supporters, do you say to voters who are attracted to some but not all of the policies that are in your proposal?
I want to respond to something that I heard first, which is this concept about trust. Trust in Portlanders. And I really question, why did the city council that chose these members to serve on an independent charter commission not trust that they did their due diligence and moved through a process to get us to the final outcome? What is the purpose of commissions and of appointing people to these bodies if we are not going to move forward or truly consider the merits of their recommendations? The Charter Commission's process is an example of deliberative democracy. These Portlanders from so many parts of the city, they did not go into this process having a specific policy outcome that they wanted. Instead, they had to move through identifying what their values were, and they truly listened to Portlanders. They started off by asking, what are the problems that you are facing? They didn't present a policy proposal first. They asked, what are the problems? And after that, once they had created a proposal, they went back to community. They documented this process. It was open and accessible, and it featured community voices that typically don't have a seat at the table. I am most interested in wanting to know how Portlanders of color and voters that are renters and low income and working class people, how were they captured in this other process that I have truly not seen be open? So I really want people to take away that there was a robust civic engagement process that moved the commission through what their final recommendation was.
I just want to add that this was always seen as a comprehensive plan. The people on the city council, although the opposing team have changed their position several times, initially were only interested in changing that form of government. And that's true. The people on the inside, that's what they're really concerned about. But when we talked to those Portlanders, when we had those 26 public engagement meetings and we listened to thousands of Portlanders, I've attended more than 40 neighborhood association meetings. I found that out in the neighborhoods, the main thing they were concerned about was no district representation. If we had only given what one group wanted and ignored what the other group wanted, that's not showing much trust in the people who came out to talk to us. And there is another problem, which is that, in fact, when we polled, what polled highest was wanting the district representation and ranked choice voting. So if we had done that, and that passed, and the change of form of government did not pass, what we would have a Southeast representative that now runs the fire department, it wouldn't make sense. They had to work together.
All right, we have our final question of the evening. As required by the charter review process, there were months of public participation leading up to this proposal, as we've spoken about before. Do you think the participation was meaningful and produced a good outcome, or what alternative mechanisms, including types of public engagement, could you utilize to produce a more favorable, inclusive, and democratic outcome? Again, we're going to start with the supporters on this one.
She's finally let me start one. I'm so excited. We didn't just speak to Portlanders, although we spoke to thousands of Portlanders. We polled over 4,000 Portlanders. We also talked to the directors of all the bureaus. We talked to the city council. We talked to civil society. We listened to experts, academic experts. We talked to city managers around the nation. We even talked to people from other countries to learn how their systems work. And this gives me an opportunity to tell you about this multi-member system that we have been told is not used anywhere else on the planet. The multi-member system with proportional representation, I'm just going to give you two examples. In Dublin, it's about the same size as us, 590,000 people. They have had proportional representation in multi-member district in their city since 1921. In a 2020 European Quality of Life survey, 94% of Dubliners questioned, had a high level of satisfaction of living in our city, as opposed to the polls that we ran early on that showed 15% of Portlanders feeling a high level of satisfaction. 65%, listen to this one, 65% agreed that problems were solved quickly. That is 11% higher than anywhere else in Europe. According to an OECD 2020 survey, Ireland has among the highest trust in their government in the developed world. In Glasgow, another city about our size, this one was hard to believe, but it was the same OECD study, and it wasn't the same in every city. 100% of the people said it was a good place to live. But the interesting part was that 80% of those said that the city council had an important impact on that quality of life.
I just want to end by saying that as the Civic Engagement Manager at the Coalition of Communities of Color, we help to engage many Portlanders, and one of the key ways that we went about that was providing multilingual access. We hosted listening sessions in Spanish, in multiple languages, in Vietnamese, and that is something that really helped to capture perspectives of Portlanders that traditionally have not been outreached, to the point that the Gresham Charter Review and other local jurisdictions are looking at the Portland civic engagement model as something that they want to adopt too.
Thank you. All right, now for the opponents. Do you think the participation in the charter review process leading up to the final measure was meaningful and produced a good outcome? Or are there different types of mechanisms, different types of public engagement that you'd utilize to produce a more favorable, inclusive, and democratic outcome?
So let me first say, I've not been to Dublin, I've not been to Malta. I'm sure those are wonderful places, and I'd love to visit them at some point in time. Sweden, the happiest country in the world, apparently, if you look at any poll. We're not taking their government over here. Most governments do not have this kind of system, but apparently Dublin does, and Dubliners are happy. I don't know how much you can transfer that to Portland. What I do know is serving on the Charter Commission, we had a lot of people come, the majority of people come and testify against this form of voting. They were not heard. Sol mentioned her organization and the polling and somebody mentioned the polling that was done. But the polling was cherry-picked. There were some, Sol's organization paid for some polling, as well as national organizations that are backing the ranked choice voting. Represent Us is one of them, paid for this polling, which amazingly showed that most Portlanders wanted to have single transferable vote from multiple districts, which is the opposite of everything I heard when I'm talking to people, when I'm running for office, when I'm out there in neighborhood associations talking with them. Everybody wanted to change our form of government because they don't like the commission form of government. Nobody came up to me and said, Vadim, we need to have multi-member districts with single transferable vote, electing 25% of the people, electing people to office with only 25% of the vote. Nobody. But on the Charter Commission, that's what they came up with, and they're saying 75% of Portlanders actually wanted this, their number one thing, more than the Charter Commission. So talk to your friends. I challenge you, talk to your friends, talk to your people and your neighbors, ask them if that's the number one thing that they wanted, and if that 75% makes sense. On the other hand, we had an independent poll, which was also with the Coalition of Communities of Color. It was with North Star, which now is an advocate for ranked choice voting, and the Portland Business Alliance. That showed that 25% of Portlanders wanted to have a change in our form of government. That's various portions of that poll, but together it was about 25%. It showed that 17% of the people wanted to have accountability as their number one thing. 1% said ranked choice voting was their number one thing that they wanted. The only independent poll, ranked choice voting was very low. Also in that poll, and this was not disclosed to the Charter Commission, it was leaked later on after we already voted, 72% of people that were polled said they wanted to have separate measures about the form of government, about the election system, about ranked choice voting. Those individuals knew about it. They didn't release it to us, but we saw these polls, which were outlandish. So once again, democracy. People came to us, they had problems with it, their voices were not heard. This voting system was something from beginning to the end, pretty much the same, 4 districts, 3 people each, 12 people altogether. And once again, not democratic. Thank you.
Vadim, as from your experience sitting on the Charter Review Commission, I'm curious what could have been done differently. You know, part of the question was kind of how could we have better captured the public's perspective, and if you don't think that was reflected in the resulting measure, I guess what could have been done better?
Well, one I think is the structure, because what happened was instead of having an open dialogue about these things and the main Charter Commission meetings, it was split up into subgroups. And so we had one group on voting system, one group on government system. So you only had a small portion of the Charter Commissions actually make recommendation to the Greater Commission. And so what you saw was like on the government forum, okay, that changed a lot. At first, the government committee recommended a council, or we're talking about recommending a council manager form of government where the mayor, there wouldn't be a mayor. Then it switched to a strong mayor, became a weak mayor. There was no tiebreaker vote until Ted Wheeler came last minute and said, no, this is going to be terrible if you don't give the mayor at least a tiebreaker vote. But anyways, that changed a lot because that group listened to people, that group conversed a lot. The subgroup on the voting system, you know, we had very few people attending. We didn't have the greater group understanding what we were voting on, and I think that would have helped if it was a larger discussion.
I also wanted to give the supporters an opportunity to respond to that. Another thing too, just in terms of, I believe I've heard twice the opponents raise this issue this evening, and this isn't data that I have seen, so I wanted to see if you could speak to it as well. They've said a couple of times that during the process or Vadim had said twice that the number of people, that there was a greater number of people who were opposed to multi-member districts than those who were. And I just wanted to offer you the opportunity if we can get a fact check on that, or are there numbers?
I can start off by answering that first and say that that is not accurate. The Charter Commission hosted a survey that had over 4,000 responses, and one of the key sentiments when you ask people, do you want more than 1 member per district? In their head, the way that they defined that was, that's more representation for me. That was the clear, resounding statement. When people look at multiple members, in their eyes, it is giving them more representation. I do not have the number off the top of my head, but this is all publicly available. And I also just really want to emphasize to everyone here, as you're considering this measure, please do your follow-up. That poll is available on the North Star Action's website, and you will find that it is not 1% of Portlanders that support ranked choice voting. The GBAO and FM3 research was presented to the commission. That's all available online, and what it shows in both polls is that 72% of Portlanders want ranked choice voting.
I don't have time. Do I have time? No.
He did ask 2.
You give me 1 minute per question. I'll just add a couple more things. You know, I think it's really important to understand the process that it really took us to get to those 17 votes. And I'll just be honest, as someone who was in long nights, in lots of meetings, doing a lot of research, chairing the Form of Government Committee, assigning homework, as you know, which was not their favorite. That's the teacher in me. You know, unfortunately, Vadim, I'm curious about your perspective because I don't think you showed up in the ways that you're claiming right now. It's unfortunate, it's upsetting, because we put in the work to build the coalition that got to that 17. We came in with very different ideas of where our city was going to go, and we all came together, worked hard in front of the cameras, behind the scenes, to build a strong coalition that was going to create the proposal that we did. And so that's really important for us, and important for you all to understand, that the deliberative process we went through, not only with community but with each other, really reflects the spirit of Portland, which was working towards the outcomes, and that's what we achieved with our proposal.
I mean, that was our final question.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, do I do the closeout? I'm sorry. Little script snafu, folks. It was bound to happen. At least we got to the end of the evening before I bungled it. So that brings this event to the close. But we are thrilled to have the chance to hear from so many candidates for city office. What? Oops. Oops. Man. Oh. Fumble.
That's for Friday.
Yeah, that's all, folks. No, we hope this was helpful as you consider how to complete your ballot for the November election. If you missed any of this event tonight or want your friends to hear it, please direct them to our media sponsors, KGW and X-Ray. And folks, it's been a long day. I'm so sorry.
No one here is running for election. To be clear.
Thank you. That was a great moderator. I appreciate it.
I'll close it out for Portland Forward. Thank you to the moderators. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for coming to our first in-person event. So we are Portland Forward again. We're the main host of this event, and we do love to host events like this, and we love to participate in things like this. So if you do want to learn more about us, check out our website at portlandforward.org. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and like Shane said, send your friends and followers to KGW or X-Ray to hear this if they missed it, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future.